Chambers will be getting started shortly. We are waiting on Representative Jarvis Johnson. The Committee on Urban Affairs will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Representative Cortez.
Here.
Representative Campos. Here. Representative Holland. Representative Shaw. Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Bernal. Representative Slayton. Here. Representative Gates. Here. Representative Mijares. We have a quorum.
There is a quorum present, and thank you all members for coming to this beautiful city of Houston and these beautiful city council chambers. We're very fortunate and honored to have the Mayor Pro Tem of Houston here today, Mr. Dave Martin. Mr. Mayor, if you would please come on up. Thank you for joining us today at the Urban Affairs Committee meeting in your beautiful city council chambers.
Thank you, Chairman Cortez and distinguished House members of the Urban Affairs Committee. I'm here along with my fellow council member, Robert Gallegos. Welcome you to the city of Houston, the fourth largest city in the United States. Mayor Turner would be here, but he had some surgery a couple weeks ago, so he's at home recuperating. Anything you need, we're here to serve you today. We have a number of our staff from the city of Houston here as well. Hope you have a great meeting. Your background, many of you had the opportunity to know former council member Jarvis Johnson, now State Representative Jarvis Johnson, and a number of you that served on city council. And Chairman Cortez, we had the opportunity to meet. Actually, last time I was in Austin when I had the opportunity to testify, unfortunately against one of my constituents, State Representative Marianne Perez, but we really have a great relationship with all of the folks that represent us in the city of Houston in the State House, and we appreciate everything that you do each and every day. It's going to be an interesting session that you're going to walk into in January. I live in Representative District 127, which was Dan Huberty's, and we have a new freshman state rep coming in, Charles Cunningham, and I hope you welcome him with open arms. I serve with both Dan and Charles on our local school board, and they both do a great job day in and day out, and I think you'll enjoy Mr. Cunningham, State Representative Cunningham. So have a great day. It's an honor to have you in our house, and anything you need, you just let us know, or just ask Jarvis. He knows where everything is around here. God
Thank
bless.
you, Mayor, so much for being here. Did you have the good fortune of serving with Councilman Jarvis
No,
Johnson
he
at the
taught
time?
me everything I know, though. You know,
Oh, okay.
He's as you can tell, he's
Jarvis,
a
you have
lot
any
older
thoughts on
than I
that?
am.
Any thoughts on that, Jarvis?
I'm a hold my comments, but yeah, I'm absolutely a lot older than you, but certainly not smarter. But I think everything has changed since I've been here. You added more people.
Yeah, we sure did.
You're trying to get to state democracy. Is that right?
That's it. You're right about that. But
Awesome.
y'all have a great day.
Mayor, thank you again
and God
for
bless.
being here
Thank
today.
you. Thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. So thank you again, Mayor Pro Tem Dave Martin, for coming by to welcome us. And it's great to see everybody here in the audience. I just want to read over some quick housekeeping issues. If you are testifying and you have not filled out the witness affirmation form, please grab one from the back table and fill it out, then hand it over to our clerk, who is here, Ms. Lopez. We can't take any testimony from you until you fill out the form. In addition, there'll be no bills or resolution to be considered or voted on during the interim hearings. We have witnesses who are registered to testify neutrally, as the purpose of these meetings is to gather information in order to compile the committee's interim report. If you're watching on the internet and want to send comment on any of today's issues, here's how to do that. Go to the Urban Affairs Committee page on the Texas House website, click on notice of today's hearing, and then hit the hyperlink in the comment section of the notice. Please silence or turn off your cell phones or other mobile devices so we can proceed without interruptions. And members, we do plan on working through lunch today. The lunch will be served in the back. And so we will begin with charge number 2. But before I do, I just want to take a moment to recognize Senator Vandepute. Senator Leticia Vandepute is here from San Antonio, and we're very honored and happy to see her. She was unfortunately involved in a terrible accident in Florida. And so for her to make the effort and to be here with us today, it means a lot. So Senator Vandepute, thank you for being here today, and Godspeed on your continued recovery. So we'll begin with charge number 2. So the House Committee on Urban Affairs has been charged with determining whether the availability of workforce housing can keep up with our growth. There's evidence that there is concerns with that across the state. Teachers, police officers, child care workers, paramedics, and many others generally have spent more than 30% of their income on housing and must spend on child care, transportation, and other education needs to make ends meet. The committee's task is to study the things that state and local governments are doing to help build more workforce housing to see what works best, and related to that, we want to make sure these measures are transparent and accountable. This is a complicated picture. A lot of stakeholders that are present to talk about this, and so we'll begin to hear testimony. We'll start with our director from TDHCA, Director Wilkerson. It's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for being here today in Houston with us. And if you could please state for the record your name and who you're with, and you can begin your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman, members. My name is Bobby Wilkinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs.
Is the microphone on?
Bobby Wilkinson, Executive Director of Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. TDHCA is a state agency charged by Chapter 2306 of the Government Code to assist local governments and Texans in the provision of housing for individuals and families of low, very low, extremely low, and moderate incomes, and contributing to the preservation, development, and redevelopment of neighborhoods and communities, assisting the governor and the legislature in coordinating federal and state programs affecting local government, particularly those related to housing, and serving as a source of information to the public regarding all affordable housing resources and community support services in the state. So how do we meet that need? Primarily, we accomplish it through several programs for both single-family and multifamily approaches. We have homeownership programs where we help people with affordable mortgages and down payment assistance. We have a build-your-own sweat equity program called Bootstrap. Habitat for Humanity would be a recipient I would recognize. We have financing tools for new construction or the rehabilitation of affordable housing apartments. This variety of programs ensures that we serve a wide range of Texans' needs. In looking at the committee interim charge and evaluating the availability of workforce housing in the state, I think we need to consider what the actual affordable housing need in the state is. I have some statistics from our state low-income housing plan. We call it the SLIP. We put it out every year. This is the need for rental housing. In 2021, there was a little more than 2 million households considered to be extremely low income, very low, or low income with at least one or more housing needs. A housing need is defined as an occupant meeting one or more of these three criteria: substandard physical condition of a housing unit, having to spend too much of the household's income on housing costs, and whether or not the unit is overcrowded. The cost one is the largest. We have every reason to believe that since the time of the data, the need has only grown. I think the other aspect of this charge is defining affordability. The term itself is defined differently depending on who you talk to. For our programs, TDHCA defines affordability as a household that spends no more than 30% of its income on rent or mortgage payment. So if a household is spending 30% or less of its income on rent or mortgage payment, that's considered affordable. Just generally, not capital A affordable, just market rate and subsidize both. Conversely, as soon as they have to start spending more than 30%, they're considered housing cost burdened. Of course, the two variables at play are income and what the household is spending, whether that is for rent or mortgage. In Texas, both income and housing costs are increasing, but at different rates, unfortunately. Looking at it from a single-family homeownership perspective, per the Texas A&M Real Estate Center, in the last year, median family income in Texas increased 13.6%, but the median home sales price increased 17.4%. The report concluded that as long as the rise in home prices continues to outpace the increase in income, purchase affordability, or the ability of a household to buy a home will continue to diminish. In Texas, the median home price has increased for the 15 consecutive months. No doubt the increasing gap between home prices and wages is impacting the state's home ownership rate. The latest rate was calculated at 62.3%, which is about 2% below the national average. I'd also note that we're a younger state, so that would skew that as well. From a rental perspective, a recent report from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition reflects that for every 100 extremely low-income renters, meaning they earn less than 30% of area median income, Texas only has 29 affordable units. This means that Texans with the lowest incomes, often comprised of elderly, disabled, those on fixed incomes, and those at risk of homelessness, do not have access to the units they need. So how does TDHCA work to help those families? As I mentioned earlier, we focus our efforts into two primary channels: housing assistance for low-income homeowners and housing assistance to develop affordable rental housing, apartment complexes. For rental housing, our biggest tools are our housing tax credit programs, which are the most prolific producers of new and rehabilitated rental units in the state. They're great examples of public-private partnerships as referenced in the charge. Tax credit units are a great example of what some would call workforce or affordable housing. They don't necessarily target the lowest. It's mostly 50, 60% AMI, area median income, excuse me. Last year alone, we financed a new construction or rehab of 12,964 units, about 1% of the affordable rental housing needs in the state. But while TDHCA is active in the affordable housing world, we're a small piece of the puzzle. Other providers of housing are our federal partners like HUD or U.S. Department of Agriculture, Rural Development Agency, and of course the free market. All of us work towards meeting the state's need, but as I just shared, there remains a group which has historically been hard to serve: the extremely low-income group. Those households at or below 30% of area median income, and our tax credit programs do provide some units to meet this need, but it's not the best fit. Why? Based on how it was designed by the feds, the housing tax credit program hits its sweet spot, serving those with incomes around the 50 to 60% area median income mark. Given all the economic factors in affordable housing and those financial tools, developments do best when serving that range. To serve the extremely low-income population, extra sources of financing and equity are needed to help with the financing of development, which can then offset the lower rents gathered from the lower-income units. The financing of a housing tax credit transaction is like any other. The more and varying sources of funding, the more complex the transaction, and the greater the need for experienced developers. Not only is the housing tax credit program our best tool for meeting the needs of the renters, but also provides a large positive economic footprint across the state. Using a formula from the National Association of Home Builders, we estimate that the housing tax credit program last year generated $1.4 billion in local income, $264 million in taxes, and 19,320 jobs. One of our newest and best tools to help create more affordable housing is the Multifamily Direct Loan Program, or what we call MFDL. It's federally funded by the National Housing Trust Fund and the HOME program, both from HUD, and its popularity in Texas with developers is growing significantly. Both interest and funding have grown dramatically in recent years. In the last 3 years, we've gone from about $11 million in 2019 to about $48 million this year. And this year, MFDL applications were oversubscribed by a 3-to-1 margin. I'd like to add that this is usually layered with tax credits and helps fill the gap. Tax credits don't get them all the way there, and so using loan funds helps with the gap financing, and it's used as a tool to sometimes get those 30% units, like to target lower income. As with any federal housing program, the MFDL has its share of rules and regulations, something that is defined definitely challenging for the developers who use these funds and staff as well. But it's an attractive option because of low interest rates and a lack of other financing tools available. Right now, supply chain issues, unprecedented price increases in construction materials, and a lack of a workforce are major factors impacting the development community. The increased costs can be offset by finding additional financing resources like the MFDL program, and we even offered a COVID-related set-aside this year for affordable housing developments under construction that are being negatively impacted financially by the pandemic. From a single-family perspective, TDHCA has several tools that help support or provide housing. Our Texas Homebuyer programs and the Texas Bootstrap Loan Program. Our Texas Homebuyer programs remain strong despite the pandemic, and in 2021, we had a great year. We served 9,274 households with mortgages or mortgage credit certificates to help homebuyers get into their homes. 74% of the borrowers we served were at or below 80% of area median income, and the average annual income of our customers was $58,000. The average loan amount was $205,000. The Bootstrap Loan Program is our other single-family homeownership program, and it's a sweat equity, self-build housing program funded through the state's Housing Trust Fund, serving households at or below 60% of area median income. The maximum bootstrap loan is $45,000 per household at a 0% interest loan for a term of 30 years. Owner builders leverage their bootstrap loan with additional loan funds from other sources. I'd like to mention Habitat for Humanity was probably the main recipient. Part of the committee's charge is to develop and include measures to ensure accountability and transparency associated with these tools. I'm happy to share with the committee that TDHCA operates all our programs in a very transparent manner. When the agency proposes a rule change, we first engage the interested constituencies in conversation to understand what the impacts might be. We do this through public roundtables and online forums. We also have opportunity for public comment at our governing board meetings, which are held monthly. All of our hearing locations are accessible to all who choose to attend and are held at times accessible to both working and non-working persons. We coordinate translation services, the provision of auxiliary aids, and other accommodations as requested to ensure equal access and opportunity to the public. TDHCA also maintains voluntary email distribution lists, which we use to notify all interested parties of policy changes, application periods, public hearing, and public comment periods. Pertinent information is posted as an announcement in the Texas Register, on our website, Twitter, and Facebook. Participation and comments are encouraged and can be submitted either at a public hearing or in writing via email, regular mail, or fax. Switching gears now, I'd like to provide a brief update on the Texas Homeowners Assistance Fund and the Texas Rent Relief Program, which is in its finishing stages. These programs, as you're aware, utilize federal funding from both CARES and the American Rescue Plan to stabilize housing for Texans who suffered financial hardships as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, with the Homeowner Assistance Fund, we've served about 8,000 households and put out a little over $62 million. And there's an additional $27 million that's reserved for loan modifications. These loan modifications take longer because they involve homeowners who can't really afford their current ongoing payments, and we're trying to work with the servicer to modify their loan to get smaller payments, which we would contribute towards that modification. With rising interest rates, the loan mod program is having some challenges, but we can still pay property taxes and reinstate folks that are behind on the mortgage that can continue to make their payments. Related to the Homeowner Assistance Fund, we're in the process of contracting with a group of subrecipients to provide physical intake centers in addition to our online portal. Also housing counseling services and legal services. For now, we have an 800 number and a website, texashomeownerassistance.com. To date, 28,000 applications have been submitted, and we've approved about 9,500 and have another 10,000 or so in review. We have more than $600 million still available for those who qualify for assistance. Lastly, I'll conclude with an update on the Texas Rent Relief Program, which we discussed a lot last session. We're in the final stages, polling those applicants who are in line to be funded and haven't been assisted yet to see if they still have any need for aid. Overall, we've dispersed more than $2 billion to more than 310,000 households. That equates to about 1.7 million Texans. A subset of that, 21,000 households, were in the eviction diversion cases. 82% of the households served were at or below 50% area median income. And with we got $47.8 million in additional reallocated funds that we continue to dole out until the remaining funds are allocated. We also have had some money in recapture that we've been able to put out to those that are still left in line. We do expect a possible another reallocation. I don't know when, and I don't know how much, so it's hard to plan. That concludes my prepared testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the members may have.
Thank you, Director Wilkerson. Members, do we have any questions for the Director? Representative Jarvis Johnson.
How you doing, Mr. Wilkinson? Thanks for coming down and giving the information. All the information that you just had, is that in a file or some kind of handout you can be prepared to give to us?
I can have something sent to you, yes.
That'd be great. Yeah. In respect to all the housing crisis that we're in right now across this country, I mean, Texas may be in a little bit better position, but I think our housing stock is very, very, very low, and it's drawing a very bleak picture, especially for those that are from the low-income areas that simply don't have the income. As things are growing, as the supply chain and costs are going up every single day, I mean, it's obviously driving affordability away from many people. But one of the things that I see is that we're not reinvesting money back into communities. When you look at certain communities that we're building in, we're starting to see that some of these communities are void of additional services. That may create additional opportunities for extra income. And in this day and age, many people are having to do 2 and 3 jobs just simply to get by. As a state representative, I have 6 because I get paid a whopping $7,200 a year. So at the end of the day, you have to be able to balance. But when you don't have money flowing in particular communities, then you leave out the opportunity for the business community to look for those particular communities to say, I want to put my business here, my restaurant, my entertainment district, whatever the case may be, grocery stores, that create the opportunity for young people to have jobs or entry-level people to have jobs. How do we address much of the disparity in how we're building? One of the things that I've always said is that when we start looking into those communities and finding ways to contract with the people from those communities, because oftentimes we're going and finding these developers that are building, and they're from somewhere else. They're hiring people from somewhere else. And oftentimes those dollars are not circular. They're not moving throughout the community. We're hiring developers from other cities that are then building in Houston. They're hiring people from other parts of the city that don't live in that particular community. So we're putting a house, but we're not reinvesting, if you're following what I'm saying. And I think it's important that we start to look at how do we do a better job of making sure, because this is a delicate balance and it's just very hard to do, especially in this area and arena of people who we're trying to serve to be able to provide housing. So we have to do a better job of making sure we balance it so that the business community will certainly want to be in that particular community that we're building in, because businesses follow rooftops, certain rooftops. And if we're only building all of these, communities that are considered low income, the businesses are not coming, and then those communities are void. So then you have, food deserts and, no restaurants, no entertainment industries, no insurance, so forth and so on. So my comment is we have to do a much better job of looking at the entire totality of the issue to make sure that we're able to address those issues with the people who are not able, or who we're trying to address this housing deficit to. So how do we get to that point of making sure that we're building and creating opportunities for the local contractors, for the local people that live in that community, so that we can see these precious dollars that we're using, these taxpayer dollars, are being circular, so they're continually flowing in and around the community as opposed to simply just leaving out the community. And all you have is a house, but people still got to pay taxes. People still have to do all of the things that happen inside that area. So, need to be able to look at how we address the local presence of building inside of communities, and then from there, how do we find the contractors that are in the community by which we're building.
Yeah, so there's kind of two sides of that coin, as far as directing tax credit developments. Do we push them where jobs are and where things, are high opportunity areas? Or do we lead with housing in an area that maybe hasn't seen enough investment? And to be honest, we do both. The goal is dispersion and to help all communities as much as we can. As far as, who benefits, we do have some out-of-state developers that have come in recent years, but those construction jobs, the hammer swinging, those are local people. As far as making the tax credit development kind of an engine of progress in itself, so we incentivize, of course, nice amenities, but some services as well. So I think especially some groups do a good job with after-school programs, et cetera, to help folks. I've thought about, should we make these more mixed use with like a retail environment on the first floor? That's a job right there. It's in your building. There's complications with that. We can't subsidize that portion with the tax credits, but it's definitely something that interests me and that I hope we can look more into in the future.
Well, those are the things that we have to be able to look at, is how we have to be more creative, because we're in very trying times. We're in different times. We're at inflation rates that are the highest it's been in 40 plus years. We have a housing stock that obviously is here, and the builders are building, but the costs are going up. So at the end of the day, we have to figure out we have to be more creative. So we have to learn how to color outside the lines. But I do want to challenge a little bit on those hammer swingers. While they may be, when we look at Houston, they may be local to Houston, but they're not local to Acres Homes. They're not local to the community by which they're swinging that hammer. And that's the thing that I'm talking about, because when you get paid, you shop where you live. You spend your money where you live, and that keeps those businesses flowing and keeps those businesses growing. So that's why I'm often looking at even narrowing down from state, county, to city, to neighborhood. Like, how do we find those neighborhood people showing up and doing the job? Because then they're simply right around the corner, and we know they're going to, the grocery store understands that they're there and their money is there. So that's, I'm narrowing it down even further than just simply the entire city. My district is District 139, and I often challenge developers to say, are you hiring people from this community, from District 139, from Acres Homes? Because that's how the money continues to flow. That's how the community grows without it just simply falling down. And I know, that's just the ebbs and flows of development. But unfortunately, a neighborhood shouldn't have to die before we decide to say, we need to build over there. And that's how these neighborhoods have gone. We've developers want to go in when the land is cheap. That's, buy low, sell high. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be killing neighborhoods. We should be bolstering them. in order for them to continue to progress, as opposed to waiting for so long. And I think you said it, and that's why I think we have to do and in both, and that's why I still want to, encourage the mixed use, how we get there. So we have to work with the feds on that. We need to do that, work with the banking community on that. Let's do it, but let's see how we can color outside the lines to keep these communities balanced.
Yes, sir. And I'll look into ways to incentivize even more local employment with the developments.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Slayton.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here today, as well as everyone else. It's good to be here with you. So, what range do you see percentage? Let me back up. With the public-private partnerships, what percentage do you see private? What percentage do you see public? Maybe from some existing deals, or where do you expect that range to be?
So every tax credit development is a public-private partnership, right? And so with the competitive tax credits, the 9%, it's supposed to shifting cost environment, about 70% of the construction costs
Is public or private?
is public. Is tax credit funded? The tax credit is the equity. They actually
70, around 70%, or right at.
Right. And the less competitive tax credits are about 40%, 30 to 40% of the construction costs.
And so in any of these deals, if the project, the program, the house, whatever, the housing development, if it fails, who's on the hook for all of that?
So I guess the loss to the state, if a development goes bankrupt, would be that it would wipe out the land use restriction agreement, and there would be a loss of affordability. But there's no additional financial loss for the state. I guess maybe if we had loaned them money and we were second in line, that those dollars would not be returned. It's very rare. We try to underwrite deals to make sure that they'll cash flow, for the foreseeable future. Because we want to preserve that affordability, for 30, and then sometimes if they, in competition, if they elected for a 45-year LURA.
Thank you.
Oh, I have a couple questions.
Sir.
Gary Gates. You said there's a 13% increase in construction cost. Is that right?
My data here is 13.6% median home sales price.
Okay.
Excuse me, median family income was 13.6%. Median home sales, 17.4%. The point was,
Okay, what about construction cost? Did you have a figure for construction cost?
Talking to tax credit developers, I don't have any data in front of me, but they talk about 20% year-over-year increases. It depends on where they are.
Okay, well, what I'm trying to get is, what do you know is the cost of construction per foot to build a new project?
It varies on if it's like a walk-up garden style or it's a podium with a garage. I don't know. I'd have to get back to you. We have a range, but maybe 160 ish.
Okay, is that you said there was 12,900 units built last year?
Yes.
Those,
awarded. They wouldn't necessarily be built right away.
Awarded.
Right.
And that would be new construction.
A combination of new construction and rehab.
Oh, rehab.
Yeah.
When you do and all of that, each one of those, you have to provide a certain number of units at a certain income level, right?
Yes.
And does your agency monitor to ensure compliance that they have those units at certain income is being met? How is that monitored?
Yes, we have a pretty intense compliance regime. We both do desk reviews and on-site inspections. So both physical inspections for the property, quality of the units, amenities, et cetera, and then file reviews to make sure that everyone's been checked out to make sure they're the proper income, et cetera.
And do you do that on an annual basis?
So Properties usually get inspected physically every 3 years. I think the file reviews would be a little more often than that. If a property's had some complaints or they have a low score, then they'll get on an accelerated inspection schedule, every year, maybe every 6 months, depends on the severity of the problem.
So the compliance monitoring is ongoing, and you're verifying the income and the whatever units are being provided at certain AMI levels. That's being monitored annually, but you go out and inspect at least every 3 years?
Yes, sir.
Is that for the entire time that the LUR is in place?
Yes, sir.
And even if it sells to someone else, it still remains under the LUR, and your agency continues to monitor it?
Correct. Yeah, the only thing that would wipe out the LURA would be, I think, bankruptcy, like I said. Or time, it would lapse eventually.
I didn't hear you mention PFCs. Are they not in any way under your jurisdiction?
Correct. There might be a PFC that issues private activity bonds, and they meet the 50% test, go over to 50%, and we meet them with the 4% tax credits. But the subject last session, which was not involved tax credits, they were just PFC deals, we're not involved in any way.
It's a public facility corporation, and they have certain parameters they have to meet to certain income levels. Who, if you don't monitor them, who does?
I guess they have guardrails in the statute, and then when they're creations of the city, this is out of my realm of expertise. But if you want to give me their bond cap, I'll take it.
Okay. Would it just take simple, if there is no one monitoring them now, is that something the agency could monitor if it was allowed through legislation?
That would be a new direction for us, kind of a regulatory role. I often get calls more about housing authorities than PFCs, and I have to tell the person, I'm sorry, I can't, intercede on your behalf for this local housing authority. You need to go to HUD. So yeah, us having some kind of oversight role on PFCs, I don't even know what that would look like, but happy to work with you on it and discuss, and we'll do whatever statute requires.
Have you ever heard complaints about the PFCs?
I saw the article that came out a few years ago, and then the University of Texas report, and then of course saw you and other members with some file bills last session, and it was interesting. But because we weren't involved, I didn't do any kind of deep dive into it.
If the tax benefits, let's say in PFCs you get property tax exemption and you get sales tax exemption if it's a new development, and they total up to a certain amount, and of course every year the property taxes is ongoing, you get the exemption, you would agree that the benefit to the owner, there should be some equalness in the benefits being given to the residents in reduced rents. Should there not be, or shouldn't it be? You would agree?
That makes sense, and my understanding was they were targeting 80% area median income. I don't know if they did reduce rents as well, and I don't know how that was memorialized. If they have a land use restriction agreement like would be on one of our properties, I haven't been a party to those contracts. At some point, the value of those tax benefits would only get you so far. I think that if you had a bill that was make them all 30% AMI units, it would not underwrite, it wouldn't work. But certainly there should be something that could be done, I would imagine.
They shouldn't be built in the 80%, if they're let's say they have 50% need to be rented to people who make 80% of AMI. And you said 30% of that number can go toward rent. That's
the 30%. So if you had them for 30% AMI units, meaning, no.
No.
Okay.
I said if you rent to someone if the stipulation is you have to rent a certain number of units to people who make 80% of the average AMI. The maximum rent you could charge for that person is 30% of their income.
So those 80% AMI rents, 60% AMI rents, 50, 30, those are all set out in like based on a formula from HUD fair market rents. It's not about their necessarily what their income is. It's not calculated that way, like a housing voucher, rent from a tenant would be. It's just, if you're an 80% unit, it's this much for one bedroom and this much for a two bedroom in that, county. So it's not calculated on their exact income. Does that make sense?
Well, okay. If in that county, let's say the average AMI is 60,000, we're going to lease to someone whose income is 80% of that AMI. So it'd be 80% of 60,000. You agree?
Right.
80% of 60 is $48,000. Now, don't you say that what they apply, you can't have a rent that's more than 30% of that?
So the rents for tax credit properties, it would just be an 80% unit in this county is this much per month, for a one bedroom and this much for two bedroom, regardless of their exact income. It is possible that it could be over 30% of their income. It probably wouldn't be.
Okay, let's say after the adjustment, 80% of AMI is $49,600. If you take 30% of that on a monthly basis, that would be about $1,240 for rent. But you're saying that if the rent's $1,400, they had to pay more than 30% of their income to have that?
Yes.
Well, how does that match the 80% of AMI then? Because, they're having to use 35% of their income of 80% of AMI. Well, where's the break to the tenant then if you just charge whatever you want?
Well, you can't charge whatever you want. It's laid out, based off of a HUD formula every year, fair market rents, and it's reduced. It's below market. It might not necessarily be below 30% of their household income. Probably usually would be, but it is below market rent that's set and that can't be raised until HUD raises them again.
Maybe that's where I'm getting confused. The typical HUD is 30%. That's typically what it's 35% if you add utilities, 30% if it's just straight rent.
Right. So people that have like Section 8 vouchers, it's that way, but these tax credit units are not held to exactly their income. They're set rents. It's just different.
Okay. Whatever that rent is at the end of the day, it should be, if the market rent is that rent, how is the tenant then being helped?
Tenant would be paying a below market rent.
If it would need to be below market rent, right?
Correct.
And so if it's not below the market, then there's no benefit to the tenant. And if a PFC development is built and its market rent is the same as the neighbors, even though they're getting all these tax benefits, there's no real benefit to the resident, is there?
That would seem to be the case, yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions for the Director? Okay. Thank you so much, Director, for being here today. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you also for the update on the rent relief program.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Next, providing testimony, we have from the Houston Housing Authority, David Northern. David, it's good to see you. If you could please state your name, who you represent, and you can begin your testimony.
Yes, sir. My name is David Northern. I'm the president and CEO of the Houston Housing Authority. I'm also the president of the Public Housing Authority Directors Association out of D.C. We represent close to 1,900 housing authorities throughout the nation with 1.9 public housing units. That organization is set to focus on the policy and guidance from the Department of Housing and Urban Development that oversees local housing authorities. In Texas, for example, there's 399 housing authorities throughout the jurisdiction. So Houston is the largest. We're the third largest voucher program in the nation with over 18,000 vouchers, and close to the sixth largest housing authority in the nation also. So I want to say thank you for allowing us to speak on this important matter from the guidance of the Houston Housing Authority. We serve over 70,000 citizens here in the Houston jurisdiction. We also really focus toward workforce housing. As you mentioned earlier, they're 30% of income, so our whole goal is to move toward individuals coming off of the program so we can house others. We currently have over 71,000 citizens on a wait list for units, and we see rents increasing. We see a number of issues and barriers along with having a decreased amount of one-bedroom units. So it's really that's the biggest need right now in order to house individual one-bedroom units, especially along our the homeless population. We have a number of programs to help the population here in the city of Houston. We have our Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We have our public housing program. And we use a number of tools to create new affordable housing units, whether it's brand new construction or it's acquisition opportunities. Just recently, the Houston Housing Authority was awarded from the Department of Housing and Urban Development what we call an MTW program, Move the Work. And so that program allows us to have specialized activities locally to address the needs of our citizens here in Houston. One of the goals we're also working toward is to have a flexibility with that MTW program. For example, Houston Housing Authority, San Antonio Housing Authority, and I believe Dallas maybe has that program. Maybe not Dallas, maybe Fort Worth. But we're looking at how we can utilize that program for other housing authorities in our jurisdictions so we can have matched programs and we can develop more affordable housing and utilize those programs to help in terms of workforce. Currently, we're looking at goals to create an incubator for our clients as far as job training, workforce, and continually make partnerships throughout Houston. But we also creating a shared office space. So when we create small or minority businesses, they can work locally. They can have an office setting. For example, one example is that some of the clients that may start businesses suffer because they don't understand the finances, or don't understand how to fill out the paperwork that's necessary. So in that incubator or shared office space, we will have those type of facilities to help train and show them how to do that and to work on that so they can be successful business owners. Mr. Wilkinson did a great job explaining some of the programs. I won't go into a deep dive of what a 9% tax credit is or what a 4% tax credit is, but those are one of the main and only tools that we have as a public housing authority to create and develop units. HUD's not funding new public housing unit development, but we can utilize our resources to partner in terms of public-private partnerships to create more affordable housing. As Mr. Wilkinson said earlier also, it is a major gap, especially when we're talking about 4% tax credits. And so we have great partners like the City of Houston and other partners that we work with to ensure we can create affordable housing and replace a number of units that was lost in the storms. And so I just want to say thank you for allowing me to come up here and just talk a little bit about the Houston Housing Authority, and thank you for taking this charge. It's something that's very important to the clients that we serve, and we serve some of the communities most vulnerable. And I'm happy to be able to represent the Houston Housing Authority here, but also I'm happy to be able to represent housing authorities across this nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Northern. Members, any questions? Representative Slayton.
Hello. So have you had any churches reach out and try to help with the housing problem, or has it mainly been public-private, like with government and investors and builders, or have you had any churches reach out and try to take a significant role with helping with the housing crisis?
Yes. Locally and throughout the nation, churches are getting in the business of helping develop housing. churches have a lot of land and a lot of times, right? And so they're utilizing some of their funds to purchase land, but also to help develop affordable housing, especially for seniors, people with disabilities throughout the areas.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Thank you so much for being here today and providing testimony.
Thank you.
Do we have from the Texas Affiliation of Affordable Housing Providers, Dr. Jim Gaines here? Dr. Gaines? Okay. Chair calls Roger Arriaga and Jean Latcha from the Texas Affiliation on Affordable Housing Providers. It's nice to see you all again. If you could please both state your name and who you're with for the record. And just so the audience knows, next on deck will be Michael Wilkes or David Long with the Texas State Affordable Housing Corporation. If you want to come on up and sit at this front table to prepare. Okay, so please state your name.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Roger Arriaga. I'm Executive Director of the Texas Affiliation of Affordable Housing Providers. I might start by just giving a little clarification. So Dr. Gaines represents the Texas A&M Real Estate Center, so they are their own entity, and we thought it would be a good suggestion that he might provide some information or data, which I'm sure he'd be willing to provide as you would request. But that being said, let me start by saying that we thank you so much for inviting our testimony today. The Texas Affiliation of Affordable Housing Providers, or TAP, is the largest statewide affordable housing trade organization representing the owners, builders, funders, developers, and others who work to bring capital and expertise to the issue of affordable housing. They specifically focus on issues involving tax credits, bond financing, and other sources intended to supplement the development of safe, quality, and affordable housing for the working families of Texas. We truly appreciate this committee's interest and focus on the challenges facing workforce housing. There are a number of financial issues impacting working families today: healthcare, education, rising food prices, childcare, housing costs, of course. It has become increasingly difficult for middle-income workers to find housing in areas in which they work, whether it is to buy or to rent. Some might be attributable to wages not keeping up with the increasing cost of living, but it's also due to the limited supply of housing that is priced at levels that these workers simply cannot afford. What we can tell you for sure is that regardless of financial circumstances of these families, they will go to any length to be sure their families are fed and that there is a roof over their heads. What this means is that their disposable income available to them is basically non-existent. When they're spending most of their income on housing and food, there is little to nothing left for health care, transportation, or child care. And these working families, they're simply trying to make their ends meet. For many of these families, home ownership remains well out of reach. As a result, the demand for high-quality, affordable rental properties is significantly increased. The pandemic and subsequent economic challenges have made these issues more acute. And while Texas is one of the strongest economies in the country, there is a limit to that success. That constraint is ultimately related to housing affordability and the opportunity for the workforce that keeps it moving. Housing affordability is very complex. That makes it more difficult to address because the current lack of supply across all housing types and at all price ranges. But the impacts are felt hardest on low and moderate income families, those needing workforce housing. For a long time now, the housing supply has simply not kept up with the demands of our growing population. The result is skyrocketing rents, and housing costs ultimately become because of an insufficient housing supply. Over the last year, the average rent in Texas has increased by 22%, while the rest of the country experienced a 15% increase, according to a Redfin analysis. The highest increases in the state are happening in Austin, where the average rents increased by 46% in just the last year. Almost half of what they were paying before is now added to their current rents. As these families grapple with the inflationary costs of all goods and services increasing, housing represents the lion's share of what those costs are. Housing cost burden is defined, much like Mr. Wilkins had mentioned, by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, meaning it's a family who spends, the expectation is if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing and utility costs, you're considered housing cost burden. But what we're seeing a lot of in Texas is described more accurately as extremely cost burden, basically meaning families are spending upwards of 50% or more of their income on housing costs. Even renters who earn higher incomes and would otherwise be moving into home ownership are having a hard time. In the Houston metro area, the 2022 median home price is over $282,000, which is more affordable than other parts of the state. According to a national database developed by the Center for Housing Policy, the annual income needed to afford a median house-priced home in this metro area is about $80,000 per year. The problem is that entry-level professionals such as teachers, police officers, and nurses, they all earn about $15,000 to $25,000 less than they need to make that happen. And other workers like retail clerks or custodians or your Starbucks baristas earn over $55,000 less than they need to be able to purchase a median-priced home in the area. This is even more pronounced across Texas, where the median sale of a home rose by over 19%, from $328,000 in May of 21 to just under $400,000 in May of 22. So the dream of home ownership is much harder to reach, which means that there's going to be more need for renting. And it is our responsibility to try to meet this need for them and for the Texas economy. Lower-income families are left with few options for dealing with these extreme cost increases, whether they rent or they own their homes. The most common response has been that these families simply move further away from job centers to locations where they can afford to better manage these costs. Of course, this compounds other issues like longer commutes and higher traffic congestion. Ultimately, we see this as a housing supply issue. Simply put, if there were more housing options and availability, we would eventually see pricing moderate. Right now, we're in the worst possible situation, where not only is there an insufficient supply, but the costs for providing more are in unprecedented territory because of supply chain issues, inflation, and now increasing interest rates. As housing costs continue to increase as a percentage of family budgets, other necessities like health care, child care, transportation, and education become secondary priorities. Affordable housing is at the nexus of economic development, workforce development, and educational achievement. Without a sufficient supply of it, each of these critical factors has an impact on our economic strength in Texas. There is no question that safe, affordable, quality housing stabilizes families. But even when the economy is strong, many families are left behind in search of affordability because of rising housing costs. The need remains unmet, and this ultimately limits our state's economic strength. Which brings us to this committee's interim charge. How do we deal with this housing crisis, which is really kind of an economic crisis? There are definitely actions to consider that could work to alleviate what we're experiencing in Texas. In general, solutions include retaining and expanding the affordable housing funding toolbox with concepts that have been proven in other states, like a state of Texas tax credit program to overlay the current federal tax credit program. While TAP is concerned with issues that affect availability of all housing, the federal tax program has been successfully administered and is a primary tool by the state of Texas and has been for over 30 years at TDHCA. It serves as an incentive program for private affordable housing development. It must meet extremely rigorous standards and monitoring requirements for 15 to 30 years, as was just discussed a few minutes ago. So some key things to note about tax credits. First, housing developed under this program is not public housing or government owned. Residents may receive rental assistance, but these are generally privately owned properties. Tax credit developments pay property taxes and contribute to the state and local economies. In Texas, over $12 billion has been paid to local economies since 1986. One of the reasons they're very successful is that investors in these developments, just like investors in any business, are strongly interested in well-run investments, and they have to remain compliant. TAP members want the Texas economy to thrive. Even with a lacking supply of affordable housing, the economic impact of tax credits in Texas is immense. In more than 30 years of the program's existence, nearly 300,000 homes have been preserved or built in Texas, serving over 700,000 families. Now, the benefits of workforce housing is this. It allows workers to live and work in the same community, gives them the opportunity to choose, allows critical community workers and emergency responders to live closer to where they serve. It helps alleviate current transportation issues and addresses the affordability issue as a whole. Further, there's a number of regulatory things and streamlining solutions that could alleviate costs that would help more of this affordable housing get developed. Next, I'll suggest that our President-elect, Jean Latshaw, will offer some of these in just a little bit more detail, and we're happy to provide you, this committee, any more information we can about the program and any other program for affordability to consider as you are researching and reporting. We look forward to serving as a resource to you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for the time.
Thank you again. Always good to see you, Roger. Thank you for your testimony. Members, any questions for Roger? Okay, we'll go ahead and hear from Jean. Welcome. Ma'am, if you could please
Thank
state
you.
your name and who you represent.
Yes. I'm Jean Latshaw, and I'm here representing the Texas Affiliation of Affordable Housing Providers, TAP. I will say I'm born and raised in Houston, and although I live in Austin now, I still consider myself a Houstonian. And also did some time at TDHCA, and so really appreciate all the work that Bobby and his staff do. Those are some super hardworking folks over there. It's one of the best jobs I ever had, but now I'm in this one. I also am a developer on the private side. I work for a large national development company, and we primarily do 4% tax credit deals. We've done a couple of 9% deals too. So I would say I know a lot about those programs, and so happy to take questions about those too. I want to start though just with the story about, I don't want to repeat all of the statistics and things that you've heard here today. I think we probably all understand that there's a huge demand for this kind of housing, all the way from 30% AMI to 80% AMI is really what we're talking about here. You know, those are different kinds of families, but so we had a development in Austin. One of our residents was a manager at a Torchy's Tacos, right? And was clearly making a low enough income, even though that's a pretty good gig, a low enough income to be a resident of one of our developments. Our property manager's chatting with him as he paid his rent, and we wound up hiring him. And then we promoted him a few more times, and now he is a regional manager in charge of almost 1,000 units, and quite frankly makes too much money to live in our developments anymore. He just bought an acre of land with his new wife and is going to build a house. And these are common stories about how folks live in these developments. They're able to save a little bit of money and they're able to move on. And it is true, to answer your question about cost, these are very costly right now. I'm underwriting at about $135 a foot. Some of my colleagues might say that's too low. I can tell you that in the last 6 to 9 months, we've seen cost increases of around 30%. That's, you know, our underwriting. Like I said, some of my my friendly competitors might give you a slightly different number. Right now, though, yes, it's costing about $275,000 a unit to put one of those on the ground. But one thing, that sounds like a high number, but this is the thing. That unit will serve not just one household. That unit will be affordable for 30 to 45 years, depending on the program. So that unit's going to serve how many households? 30 households over those years, right? Especially if you have stories like our property manager where he lives there for a little while, he saves a little money, and then he moves on to buy a home. And those are the things that I'd like you to remember. Our message from TAP really is this. We do want to use the tools that exist today to address this problem of a lack of affordability in Texas and for the workforce particularly. And unfortunately, though, there are statutes in place that make it really difficult and costly to do that. The tax credit program is highly legislated in Texas, more so than in any other state. Some of that, you know, we can be proud of. Some of it's just downright unusual. It includes provisions, for instance, that prevent affordable housing from being built in certain census tracts. And to your point, sir, that could result in putting these developments in places with a lack of proximity to jobs or a lack of services, because the rules of the program itself dictate that I go over here where there's nothing else going on or where that land is cheap. And we'd like to see some changes to those that make this a little bit more flexible so that we as real estate developers can make really good, sound business decisions about putting these developments in places where they're gonna serve our residents. We represent nonprofit and for-profit developers, right? But when we operate these deals, and we don't flip them when we're talking about the tax credit program. We own them for a minimum of 15 years. A lot of developers like myself, we own for 30 years or more, and just don't sell them. We cannot stay in business if we don't have good residents and good locations and collecting rent and paying our own mortgages. And so we want to put these developments in places where it makes sense. And some of the statutes that exist today make that very, very difficult. There were some other questions that you had asked that I wanted to answer, but I'm not sure what it was. I think that was about it. I will say too, I have, to answer your questions about the PFCs, I don't have personal experience with a PFC development. We haven't done that as a company. But there are two different sides of that. The PFCs do act as issuers on a 4% tax credit paired with taxes and bond deals, right? And in that capacity, they have all of the same compliance measures and everything that Mr. Wilkinson mentioned as an HFC or any other, or even TDHEA when they issue bonds paired with tax credits. So they're treated the same way. They can enter into other types of deals that don't have tax credits attached to them, and that might be the difference that we were talking about there. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for being here today. Members, did we have any questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In respect to the developments, what are some of the factors that lead to the rising cost in rent? You got your note, built it, so now you're here. What are some of the factors that would make you raise the rent?
Oh, well, in a tax credit development, we are rent restricted, and it is based on data from HUD. So would we raise our rent each year when those AMIs do increase? A lot of the times we do. I can tell you that in a lot of our developments, we don't even charge the maximum allowable rent. Because we can, quite frankly, afford not to in some of them. And we would rather have those units full than be charging a maximum rent and maybe not have those units full. But our rents increase as HUD allows them to increase, or really HUD in a combination with TDHEA's compliance.
So when you talk about the AMI increasing for the area, my question is, does that have something to do with the rising cost to maintain your property?
Typically, I think we've all seen this, right? As incomes increase, expenses tend to increase too. So yes, I have increased expenses on this side, and then I have an increased AMI on the other side, which allows me to increase my rent. So they both kind of raise at the same time.
Say that again?
So I'll have increased expenses, my own operating expenses of the development on this side, right? And then on the other side, we have an increase of income, which subsequently allows me to increase my rent. But my expenses and my rents are both rising at the same time.
But but the AMI is the area, correct?
It's so they're rather large, right? So the Houston, what we base our rents on in the Houston MSA would include a lot of the suburbs like Missouri City or Kingwood or wherever, or Spring, So
But it is the census tract for that AMI for?
No, it's for a much larger area.
So if we're looking at something like a senior citizen complex.
Yes, sir.
And their rent, they're on fixed income, they're retired, whatever the case may be. Some still may be working, but others are retired. So while their income is not going up, the AMI for that community has gone up. So therefore, you guys are able to raise the rent. So how do you address the situation that may arise when you price seniors out of homes simply because the AMI went up. The cost to do business in the apartment or the development didn't go up, but the rent went up, but the senior didn't get their cost of living increase. They didn't get a bump in any of their incomes, but yet the rent has gone up, and so now they're being displaced. So how do you see, and I know that's a hard question, it's probably a question I need to ask the director, but how do you guys handle that? Because your evictions are going to start going up because you have so many seniors that can't afford this increase in rent, because I mean, oftentimes they're already kind of right there, and if every year, you know, the rent can go up, how do you address that?
Well, and like I said earlier, we don't necessarily charge the maximum allowable rents in all of our developments. Some of them we do, because there might be a long list of folks, you know, behind that can pay that maximum allowable rent. I mean, I have to admit that is a business decision, right? If I'm not seeing a huge increase in expenses over here and I don't see a need to necessarily raise rents to counter that expense increase, then as an operator owner, I can make a decision to just not increase that rent as much as I'm allowed to. At the same time, like I said, we would like to stay in business, right? We do have debt to pay, everything else. So it's definitely a balancing act. But is there something that prevents me from just charging maximum allowable rents across the board and not really caring if that means I'm going to lose some of my residents? I mean, the short answer is no. There's not a regulation or a law that prevents that from happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how do we balance it, because we have to look at, because it's not about the maximum allowable that you can do. It's what I walked in at. If I walked in and I'm paying, you know, $1,000 in rent, and then the next year it goes up a little bit and goes up a little, I'm already at my, you know, let's just say I'm at my 27%. And if I'm living there more than 5 years, then I'm beyond my 30% now. You know, and so that's what I'm saying. And I don't want to stop you from doing business. I don't want to stop anybody from doing business. And again, I think that's more of a question that I need to be addressing to Wilkinson, because we have to look at how do we do that balance, because there are too many citizens that they're getting in, but unfortunately they're being kicked out because they don't have the rent. And unfortunately there was no more services offered. Your interest rate didn't go up. Certainly some costs may have gone up. The cost to cut grass may have gone up. You know, the cost of electricity and those other things may have gone up. But yet and still, the resident income didn't go up. And so we don't want to, if we're in an affordable housing business, we have to make sure that we don't, you know, place or price out the affordability for the people that we initially rent it to. So I'm just trying to figure out that balance, not trying to stop you from making money.
Oh, no. And I agree. And I would say this, too, that the other interesting thing that's happened with this program in the last 5 years or so is that Mr. Wilkinson did mention at the sweet spot of the 60% AMI household and serving that. But the tax credit program at the federal level was recently changed to where we can actually reach up to those 80% AMI folks too. And so what happens is we now have the ability to have truly mixed income developments financed with 4% tax credits, serving all the way from 30% AMI up to 80% AMI. So in that case, where all of my units aren't necessarily at the same level, perhaps that senior qualifies then for a 50% AMI unit and can stay, and then I can bring in another 60% AMI unit and have a more mixed income deal. There are some state laws that haven't quite married up with that new federal legislation that we'd also like to see it just adjusted so that we can actually implement that program and still build these developments in compliance with our state laws too. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions, members?
I have a couple of questions. You said the building costs around $275,000 a unit is your typical cost?
That's an all-in development cost. That's with land, developer fee, financing costs, sticks and bricks. So my sticks and bricks It's about $135 a foot right now, $120,000 a unit. Those are pretty round figures.
How much for the land?
Well, that varies, right? I mean, on that particular deal, I think we were paying about $5 a foot, which is pretty cheap.
Okay, you said $275,000 per unit.
All in.
And you say financing cost. What do you mean financing cost?
Construction interest, the cost of issuance of the bonds, all sorts of financing fees.
Okay, so what's it cost you to build it? You're saying $135 a foot?
Yes, sticks and bricks. That's without contingencies, profits, site work, things like that. Then I would be upwards more like $215 a foot.
Okay.
Okay,
so $215 a foot is what
Sure.
it costs you to typically build. So how do you said you've done these, how do you finance that? How does it work in the program that you're in?
Sure. So we go to an issuer, usually in our case, and I'm just speaking from the company that I work for, we'll go to a local housing finance corporation. Some developers might go to TDHCA or to some of those PFCs. So we'll go to that housing finance corporation and get induced for tax-exempt bonds. Then that issuer applies to the Texas Bond Review Board for those tax-exempt bonds. Then if you were able to get a bond reservation, that program is very oversubscribed right now as well, then you apply for tax credits from the TDHCA. So at the end of the day, the tax credits that we would receive from TDHCA, we take those out to investors, large investors, and they would finance probably about 30% of the total cost of the development.
Okay. I just want to catch up with
Sure.
you, okay?
Yeah.
The tax credits, is an investor, they could use that against their federal income taxes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Even though it's approved by the state of Texas housing agency.
That's
okay.
right.
And is that tax credit so if they buy, say, $100,000 of tax credit, they would take that in equal amount over 10 years?
Right.
Okay, and so that would be the 100,000. So if you get approval for $1 million, you could have one person buy the $1 million, and do you sell that at par, the whole $1 million, or do you sell it at around 90%?
So when you see TDHCA give an award of $1 million of tax credits to a developer, that's $1 million for 10 years. So it's really $10 million. And so I take that tax credit award to an investor or a syndicator, and in turn, they give me equity. So they're getting $10 million in tax credits over the next 10 years, and they'll trade that, let's say, for $9 million. They'll give me $9 million for that to finance.
So about
the construction.
90%.
Right now, let's call it 95. It's varied vastly over the last 2 decades.
Okay, so let's say it's that $1 million, that's $1 million per year, that's $10 million. Okay, so now you've got $9,500,000
Right.
to work with. Okay, so let's say your project is $30 million. So how do you now you've got 9.5. That's basically free equity.
Right.
You don't have to pay it back to anyone. It's just now how do you do the rest?
Conventional financing, just conventional debt. Now, you do have the tax-exempt bond issuance that allows you to have a slightly better rate on that financing, but it's just call it any sort of conventional debt.
Okay, so if the state agency decides to issue bonds, they will use their power to go out into the market, and maybe they can borrow it at 3 or 4%.
Right.
And then that's the rate that you would pay.
Right.
Is there, like working with the city, is there any other grant money, or is that it? Basically the tax credit, and then you have to get conventional financing?
That's the only thing that has to happen, right? Some of these deals might have, it's deal specific, right?
Your typical deal?
Huh?
Your typical.
My typical deal, that's it.
Okay. And so, and that's $10 typically, is that tax credit 30% of your total
Somewhere
cost?
around there.
And so you as a developer virtually almost don't have to put up any money because you're just taking a tax credit as your equity, so you're into it with very little, if any, money.
I wouldn't say that's true, because by the time we get to closing, we've usually spent a significant amount of money, at least $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you typically, on the overall project, get to charge a developer fee of 10 to 15, 20%?
Usually 15%.
Okay,
Yes.
15%. So of that $30 million, you would be able to charge about a $4.5 million fee.
That's correct.
Okay. And then you could just put that back in as your equity. So you still are almost in with no
And
hard dollars.
usually we do. So typically the
Okay.
ways that these are underwritten is, let's say I am collecting a $4 million fee. Usually I do have a gap of, let's say I have a gap of $3 million. So $3 million of that, I'll collect $1 million of that fee when I close on the transaction, but then the other 3 will be deferred over 15 years.
Okay. Now, for all those benefits, what is the typical parameters that you're under? Do you file a LUR on the property? Is it for 30, 40 years? What percentage? Do you have to do a certain percentage at 30% of AMI? What is a typical set of parameters that you're operating under?
So our starting point, and now I'm really speaking kind of more for the developer I work for.
Just a typical
Sure.
deal.
Is 100% at 60%. Now, I will say I haven't developed.
You said 100%, 60%.
That's my starting point. 100% of the units at rent and income restricted at 60% AMI.
Oh, 100% of the complex is rent restricted at 60, is every unit, so you have no free market units.
That's right. That's
Okay.
usually our starting point. However, I've found recently almost every issuer out there, local HFCs and the PFCs, have some other requirement that they want to see, whether it is market rate units or 30% AMI units or 50% AMI units. So we're at the mercy of our partners.
Okay. Yeah, I heard you say PFCs, public facility. So are you involved with the public facility corporation?
We haven't used one yet, but we could.
And you would finance it the same way?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay. If you finance it that way, then you're under the jurisdiction of the Texas agency, and so that's how you're being monitored.
Yes, sir.
But 100% of your units is at 60. That's typical 60%. So you may have some lower, some higher.
Right.
Do you pay property taxes?
On our portfolio, we pay property taxes on about half of them, mostly in the Austin area, just because the AMIs are pretty high. I will tell you that in San Antonio, when I've done deals there, we do not pay property taxes on those because it just doesn't work.
And how do you get, who approves that you don't have to pay any property taxes?
So that is through that local HFC is a partner in the transaction. Because
HFC, what does that stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry, Housing Finance Corporation.
Okay. Is that a department inside the Texas department?
No, sir. I'm not sure of their statute. I think it's 392, but I'm not sure. Housing Finance Corporation, local housing finance corporations exist all over the state of Texas. Some of them, their boards might consist of the city council members. Some are appointed by city council members. There's all sorts of different ways that you can structure them. But typically, the city does have some sort of oversight of that Housing Finance Corporation.
So you partner with
The Housing Finance
HFC?
Corporation. Yes, sir.
Do you give them the land?
They own the land, right, and usually enter into a long-term lease with us. They also share in our developer fee, so that $4 million gets cut. And it's just a business term, just a deal term. It varies from one HFC to the other, how much they might get.
And do you share
in cash
in the
flow as well?
cash flow?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you share in the cash flow with the HFC, you're going to take your income, you're going to minus all your expenses, you're going to take away your debt service,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're going to also provide a preferred rate of return to any investment, any capital that someone's provided.
Yes,
do you
but
get to
that's a
sort of
that's
pay a
a rare
preferred return?
No, that would be a rare occasion.
That would be what?
Rare.
Okay. Rare, just that it's not in the legal documents?
Well, I mean, I'm talking about deals that we structure. I haven't seen them in our deals. Some of my competitors might have that case.
Okay. But at the end of the day, I guess I haven't seen one of your particular deals, but the way I've seen it structured is by the time you put in the preferred rate to the equity that's been put in, there's very little, if anything, paid to the HFC in return for you not having to pay any property taxes. That's the trade-off.
That is the trade-off. You are absolutely correct.
And that money that the HFC gets, are they bound to give any of that to the school district for them educating the kids in that complex, or what?
A little bit out of my area of expertise there. Yeah.
Okay. Do you get any sales tax exemption during the development?
Sometimes, if you joint venture with a nonprofit on the construction side, you might get a sales tax on some of your construction, but that's not necessarily, again, that's deal specific.
That's only if you have a nonprofit that's participating with you.
Right. And you'd have to partner, your general contractor would have to partner with them.
Okay. And the tax exemption, it lasts for the entire term okay. Now, does anyone look at the tax credit and all the tax benefits and then decide if the subsidy being given to the tenant, is there a balance in there?
Yes.
Who analyzes that?
So typically, the Housing Finance Corporation, the bond issuer and the partner in the deal would do that analysis, which is why in some cases you might see a split of 25% of the cash flow going to the HFC and 75% to the developer, and some it might be more like
Now that's only the cash flow left over after all these deductions.
Right, but it's we do, and our partners do, calculate the value of that property tax exemption over the life of the property, and that is how we come to our splits of those developer fees and cash flows. Right.
Okay, well, you probably have an ongoing management fee.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that comes out 100% first. That's up there in those expenses.
It is.
That's not part of your cash flow.
No.
Okay.
No.
You said that that someone, when you said someone analyzes that to make sure there's a good balance, that the benefits to the developer is not exceeding the benefit to the tenants. Mm-hmm. Is that the state agency that does that?
No, that's just business terms between the HFC and the developer, really.
Well, what motivation? The HFC has zero invested, so what motivation do they have to make sure that there's a good balance?
Well, it makes their split higher, probably. I mean, if there was no analysis, I might come in and say, hey, I'll give you 10% of the developer fee and 10% of the cash flow, and they don't do any analysis. They might realize, that the developer is being a little greedy, if you will, right? But that analysis is done.
Okay. Let's say they feel that. What's their recourse?
I don't know that there is one. If they just wanted to take a lower split just because, I suppose they could, but there's no real motivation behind that.
Okay. And you say you haven't sold. Typically, you don't sell.
No.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Representative Gates. Representative Slayton.
So if Texas was to move forward and have public-private partnerships, engage with building different communities, whatever that looks like, could these people, and as we mentioned earlier, you could have a public-private partnership where it's, 60% or around that, the government, funding that, taxpayers funding that. Could they also, on top of being public-private partnership, could they then also be exempt from paying any local property taxes? And just for your knowledge, I had two plans someone showed to me. It came to a housing authority committee, and it was two plans to two different communities for these apartments to be off the tax rolls. And it was supposed to go to the local authorities, city and whatever first. It didn't go to any of them. And the plan was to have them off the tax rolls. So if we move forward, do you think if anybody's doing a public-private partnership, they should then also be off the tax rolls?
No, I personally would not say that at all. Like I said, in our own portfolio, all of our developments are public-private partnerships utilizing the tax credit program. Some of them we pay full property taxes because financially the deal worked that way. On the others, like I said, it's through the partnership with the Housing Finance Corporation that affords us that property tax exemption. In my personal experience, we've never been able to do that without some sort of approval. I know that there's a number of ways to get a property tax exemption. If you want to build a church, you can get one. I'm not sure what approvals you have to go through to do that. So if there's a way to build housing and get a property tax exemption without some sort of authority, I'm not aware of it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being patient and answering all the questions.
Oh, my pleasure.
There's a chair there if you want to sit down.
No. Thanks.
Thank you again for being here today. Chair calls Michael Wilt and David Long with the Texas State Affordable Housing Corporation.
Good afternoon. I've got my witness card and a few handouts.
Please state your name, who you represent for the record, and you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. I'm Michael
next
Wilt.
on deck, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Next on deck after that will be the Texas Association of Builders, Ed Taravella. So if you want to come on up, Ed, and sit at this front table. Please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cortez. Good afternoon to members as well. I'm Michael Wilt, Senior Manager of External Relations at the Texas State Affordable Housing Corporation. I want to thank you for inviting us to briefly share information about our programs and how they pertain to the charge in front of you. I'll try not to repeat what any of the other speakers before me said and just keep it strictly to the programs that we do. Now, I'll briefly tell you about us first. We were a statewide nonprofit created in 1994 at the direction of the Legislature. Our mission is to create safe, affordable housing for low to moderate income Texans and their families. We accomplished this by 3 program areas: helping developers build affordable housing, helping people buy a home, and helping people stay in their homes. You'll see the programs that we administer on slide 3 in your handout. It's on page 2. I'm going to go through some of these, not all of them. I'm only going to speak to the ones that directly address the charge, which is to evaluate the availability of workforce housing and study the use of public-private partnerships and other incentives that could incentivize the development of that type of housing. I'll start with our home ownership programs under the buy category of what we do. We run 2 home buyer programs. The first is the Homes for Texas Heroes program, and that's something that you all created back in the day to serve specific professions. It started out as just a teacher-specific program, and over time you all have expanded that to include first responders, so firefighters, police officers, EMS, and then the most recent category added was veterans about 3 sessions ago. The other program is not profession specific. It's the Home Sweet Texas Home Loan Program. We're serving households with incomes at or below 125% of that in certain areas, and then it even goes up to 140% in targeted census tracts. We actually increased the income limits on this program to respond to the market as more middle-income, working-class families need assistance due to the housing market. I will say that these programs almost exclusively serve workforce households, so it directly speaks to the type of housing that you're trying to address with this charge. We offer down payment assistance in the form of a grant or a three-year forgivable second lien. Assistance ranges from 2% to 5% of the purchase price, and our interest rates and options change daily to respond to the market as well. We also offer a mortgage credit certificate, which Mr. Wilkinson spoke to earlier, that allows you to get back 20% of the mortgage interest you paid in a year as a tax credit. These programs are very popular, even during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, as Mr. Wilkinson said as well. In 2021, so last year, we helped 22,726 Texans buy a home with either the down payment assistance, mortgage credit certificate, or both. In comparison, in 2020, we assisted 16,325 households, and in 2019, we assisted 9,397 households. So you'll see that over the course of 2 years, from 2019 to 2021, our volume of home buyers served more than doubled. To date, we've served more than 77,000 Texans through these programs to help them buy a house. Moving on to our development finance programs, I'll start with the multifamily private activity bond program. You all are well versed on the bond program by this point in the day, thanks to the line of questioning from Representative Gates and previous to that. We are a statewide issuer of bonds in addition to TDHCA, which is another statewide issuer, and then there are other local issuers as well. We have 4 housing priorities under our program: the preservation of at-risk rental housing serving small urban markets or rural areas, senior and service-enriched housing, and disaster relief housing. We try to meet the underserved and unmet needs of the state, so our priorities reflect that in those 4 different categories. This is primarily mixed income workforce housing with commitments of at least a portion of the units serving households at or below 50% or 60% median family income. We use MFI. It's an interchangeable term with area median income, or almost an interchangeable term. This program was improved 2 sessions ago under the leadership of Chairman Lucio in the Senate. It operates a little bit more efficiently now thanks to some of the changes that were made, and more funding became available for housing issuances after those changes were made as well. This is a heavily subscribed program. It is oversubscribed, as Ms. Lacha just told you as well. We issued more than $104 million in bond financing in 2021 to create or preserve 1,008 units. In 2022, so far, we've issued $115 million to create or preserve 756 units. We actually stopped taking reservations for 2022 because of how oversubscribed we are, and we already have applications pending for 2023. Simply put, there is a lot of demand available for bond financing statewide, so it shouldn't surprise you if there's interest in revisiting the private activity bond program in future sessions to see if there are ways for more projects to get financed. Moving on, our Texas Housing Impact Fund is our direct lending program. We provide short-term and long-term financing through it, and even offer a forgivable loan dedicated to serving extremely low-income households. Mr. Wilkinson said earlier about how these are the hardest households to serve because typically they are service-enriched units, so on a per-unit cost, it's more expensive. And also, you are hoping to collect some rental income from them, and when their income is 30% or below median family income, they barely have any money to pay with. Since this is a fund that we created, this impact fund, we have discretion over the income limits served, but again, it is a program that primarily serves workforce housing, with the exception of that forgivable loan option that I just mentioned for the most vulnerable Texans with severe complex health needs and are typically in those extremely low income units. Most of this is private public partnerships, as most of the funds that we raise are from financial institutions or other private investment entities, and then there's philanthropic investment as well, and then we blend in some of our own funds. To date, we have funded more than $18 million in loans to create more than 1,900 units of affordable rental housing through this program and 180 affordable single-family homes. I should also mention that if you're using us for financing, whether it's this impact fund or bonds or anything else, the properties developed by that financing are subject to annual physical inspections we perform to ensure property owners are complying with guidelines and regulations. This speaks to the accountability measures that are also included as part of this charge and that were mentioned earlier in the line of questioning. The last developer finance program is our Affordable Communities of Texas program, which is our land bank and land trust program. We created this after the mortgage crisis to help stabilize communities experiencing high rates of foreclosure. We work in partnership with nonprofit developers across the state to acquire and redevelop foreclosed homes, vacant land, and tax foreclosed properties, and then sell or rent them to homes that income qualify. Over the life of the program, we've acquired 573 properties and have redeveloped nearly 300 of them with 30 nonprofit housing developers across the state. We also recently began offering short-term land banking services to help nonprofits that need to acquire a property quickly but don't have the cash to do it. We'll purchase it, hold it with minimal carrying cost as we're property tax exempt, and then transfer it to the developer when they're ready to accept it. What I like about this is that it empowers nonprofits with the ability to acquire a property quickly as opposed to having to wait on a source of funds at which time the property may no longer be available, especially in a market like this. So it allows us as an entity to strike quickly and make sure we can get that property in the hands of that nonprofit. I should also mention that there have been efforts each session for the past several sessions to expand our land bank. There have been bills filed that would allow us to work with school districts and convert their surplus properties into affordable housing. And also there have been bills filed that would allow us to acquire properties with tax liens on them and convert them into housing for veterans. So this is a topic that you all as legislators continue to explore to see if there are ways to expand our land bank activities. And we're also proactively trying to expand our land bank inventory in South Texas where we can still find some deals on land. And lastly, I'll briefly mention our multifamily and single-family rental programs. We own one rental community in East Austin that provides stable, affordable rents in an area of town that is rapidly gentrifying. And then we also own 35 single-family homes across Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio that are located in high-opportunity neighborhoods but provide discounted rent to families that income qualify. With that, I'll close. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for this presentation and this information. You stated here on the last point that you have 35 single homes in Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio. Mm-hmm. How do you go about deciding what cities would have those type of homes, or how did you select Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio to provide these single-family homes?
We started in Austin, launching it as a pilot program with some neighborhoods that we were familiar with, where we saw a low inventory of affordable rental opportunities, especially with the single-family housing stock, and started to build up our portfolio of homes in the Austin area. And then our board asked us to expand the pilot to Dallas and San Antonio as well. So it was some internal decision-making, and then at the urging of our board.
Do y'all build these up from scratch, or are they existing homes that y'all just take over?
Most of the times they're existing homes. We have purchased new construction homes. We actually did that in a South Austin neighborhood, the development that was being developed by the Habitat affiliate there.
Okay. That's the first I've heard of this program, and it caught my attention, especially being from the San Antonio area, Representative Campos and I, and so the chance to expand this in that area would be great, obviously in other major cities also. So thank you.
Sure.
Any questions, members? Thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chair now calls the Texas Association of Builders, Mr. Ed Taravella. Ed, if you could please state your name, who you represent, yes, and then you can begin your testimony. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Ed Taravella. I'm a developer from Houston, and I'm here on behalf of the Greater Houston Builders Association and the Texas Association of Builders. My company, TerraCorp, was formed in '95. I was twice awarded Developer of the Year in 2004 and 2015. We seem to gravitate toward first-time homebuyer market and at the entry-level price. I am a past president of a community development corporation, or a CDC. It was formed for the development and sale of affordable housing in near North Houston. As you can see, I have firsthand experience with the success and failures of affordable housing development and why some things work and some things don't. My remarks will be focused on single-family residential for sale housing. It's not multifamily for rent, so my remarks should be taken in that context. As we're all aware, the dream of homeownership is slipping further away from a vast number of Americans. Housing affordability and availability are of paramount concern to us as home builders. And to demonstrate how truly sensitive the housing market is to rising costs, for every $1,000 increase in the price of a home, 22,000 households are priced out of the market due to not qualifying for a mortgage. Entry-level housing is at the highest demand, but it's also the most difficult to produce. The median household income in Texas is $64,000, which qualifies for a $230,000 home. The median home price in Texas is $349,000. Now, I'm sure you're going to hear some different numbers than that, but those are in the basic range of some of the other numbers that have been tossed out. About 1,200 people are moving to Texas every day. And with this population growth comes need for housing stock, much of it workforce housing. So the question is, are PPPs, or public-private partnerships, a potential avenue to facilitate attainable workforce housing? And I think the answer is most certainly yes, as long as they're structured properly, minimizing government involvement. It should be noted that many of these examples are being done at a municipal or county level, not at the state level, but perhaps some of these ideas can be adapted on the state level. So I use the term government loosely as it refers to any of these types of government. What are the main lessons learned from my experience with workforce housing is the less government involvement, the easier and cheaper things get. Before we talk about what government might do to help, let's talk first about some examples of what government shouldn't do. Government shouldn't impose minimum lot sizes on a county level and by extension coerce the municipalities in that county to also adhere to these minimum lot sizes. Affordable homes just can't be built on 9,600 square foot lots. Although it doesn't appear legal on the surface, there were some very clever ideas used to devise these workarounds around state law. Densities are one of the few ways to achieve cost savings. Something else the government shouldn't do is impose new building codes that add significantly to the cost of the home without adding any true benefit or life safety feature. You should not be forced to engineer or wire or plumb a home for the future of what homeowners may or may not want in the future. There are other ways for government to be involved, just not in the day-to-day developing projects. These are just two broad examples of the regulatory burdens that we experience. The affordability of housing can be improved if public policymakers consider the impact of their decisions and on the cost of the availability and cost of housing. So let's talk about some things that can be done. I think you've heard some of these. I'll just expand on them a little further. In one example, the government may decide to develop infrastructure such as roads, drainage, or even water or sewer plants to open up new areas to facilitate the development of affordable communities. They prime the pump, so to speak. Another option could be doing something like a Chapter 380 through 81 Economic Development Agreement, but adapted on a state level. In another example, the City of Houston devised a program called the Developer Participation Contract Program, which would reimburse